to flight school. We'll learn to fly. Ooh, let me take you to flight school.
Hey everybody, and welcome back. So as I spent some time over the last couple of weekends back in the state of Maryland with a good friend of mine who has owned a number of airplanes in his career, however more recently due to health issues wasn't able to get his medical certificate, we spent some time finishing a build of an RB-12 that he's been working on for quite some time. This is a kit plane from Vans. We took it up, did some patterns in it at his private airfield, and afterwards I told him, what are you going to do with this beautiful plane without being able to fly? He was definitely sad to say that he would not be able to continue to pursue his passion of aviation that he's had over the last 4 to 5 decades. So I asked him if he's ever tried flight simulation instead. He said no, he hasn't. So we went down to the local computer store, built him a computer, and I gave him a copy of FSX Steam Edition that I had in my gifts. One of the things that I noticed is that although he absolutely loved the experience once we got started, he had a lot of questions about how to use the interface in the first place. Now, knowing that there's so many new pilots that have been introduced to the world of flight simulation because of FSX Steam Edition being available on the largest game distribution network, which is Steam, I decided that this is a good time to do a little bit of a tutorial on how to properly use Microsoft Flight Simulator X Steam Edition, and just how to navigate through the interfaces, how to find some of the common files that you may hear about while browsing the internet and listening to the community, as well as get the most out of your simulator on a day-to-day basis. We won't be talking about how to fly or any of the basics of aviation or aeronautics, but we will be talking about just how to use the platform itself, the interfaces, and how to make the most out of it. However, you guys can continue to expect more tutorials out of me talking about some of those more specific things as you continue to further your aviation or virtual aviation careers. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, when you're launching FSX Steam Edition, you'll see that when you go to your Steam option through your start menu, you'll see that there's an option to launch it directly from the pinned items, depending on which version of Windows you're using. However, I would not recommend doing that. I'd recommend actually opening up Steam, going over to your library, and then hitting the play button from there. Sometimes this helps prevent some instances of Steam telling you that the simulator is already running, or that there was some sort of an error with launching the game. So that's just the way I would recommend going about starting the game. Now, before we actually jump into the simulator itself, let's take a look at some of the core elements that exist outside of the game. So first of all, when you're here in your library, you'll see your FSX Steam Edition main folder. Now there's a couple of things that you'll see here. Number one, of course, the play button. You see all your friends that are online. Since I've been making YouTube videos, I've amassed quite a few, and I love every single one of them. Please feel free to add me on Steam if you ever want to hang out, chat, get advice, or fly together. On the right hand side, you'll see community hubs, the forums, related groups, news, store page, DLC, community guide, support, and write a review on the game. Down here, you'll see all of your DLC that you own, that you have bought directly from Dovetail Games on Steam. You'll see some of the most recent Steam news. One really cool one is a interview by Nova Wing 24 with Amy from the Dovetail team, so I'd recommend checking out that video if you haven't already. And you'll also be able to view your screenshots that you've taken in-game by using the F12 key. So there's a couple of pieces here that I want to make sure that everybody's familiar with. First of all, if you right-click on the FSX Steam Edition folder, you'll see a bunch of different options. Let's go ahead and click on Properties, and you'll see that, first of all, you'll be able to enable or disable a Steam overlay while in-game. Any of you that have seen me flying, I find this to be an invaluable tool and something that really sets FSX Steam Edition apart from most of the simulators out there, where you can access the full World Wide Web, charts, etc., through the Steam overlay, connect with your friends, stream, as well as view some of your screenshots, listen to music, etc. Over on the Updates tab, you can choose Always Keep Your Game Up to Date, which means you'll automatically receive the official patches that come out from Dovetail Games, whether or not you'd like to allow background downloads, such as if you're downloading another game in the background. You'll have access to your local files, which will allow you to access some of your Steam Edition files, your backup game files, delete your local game content, which essentially deletes the game itself. You can also verify the integrity of game cache, such as if for some reason you accidentally deleted a file, you feel as though you've messed up your installation, instead of having to reinstall the entire thing, you can verify the integrity of the game cache, and it'll reintroduce any files that are missing from the base simulation. You can also opt into betas. So, for example, Dovetail right now is working on a new beta, and as they do frequently, as many of you know, they allow open betas to their customers. If you'd like to participate in one of their betas, if you look on the forums, they'll give you a code. You type in the code here, hit check code, and it'll take care of that for you. As well as your DLC, if you have any DLC that you'd like to enable or disable, you can do it right here from this option. So that's the Properties tab of Steam. The other thing I want to make sure that everybody knows is the Community Hub and the forums. So let's go ahead and go over the Community Hub. Now the Community Hub is kind of a landing page of, well, it is what it sounds like, the community. You can see discussions, screenshots, artworks, look at broadcasts or streams that are going on directly through Steam's streaming interface. You can watch videos, look at news, announcements. You can look at community guides as well as reviews of the game. You can also see how many folks are currently in game. It's about midnight out here on the West Coast, and not a whole lot of people are in game. Usually there's well over 1,000. You can view stats, you can follow or unfollow the game, etc. So here you'll see screenshots, you'll see some information directly from Dovetail, etc., etc. Now, another thing that a lot of folks don't know is that the FSX Steam Edition actually has its own dedicated forums directly in the Steam interface. So although there are a lot of great forums that exist outside of Steam Edition out in the World Wide Web, Steam has their own forums. You can see there's general discussion, if you need help, discussions about add-ons, both from Dovetail and not from Dovetail, multiplayer, help and advice, and trading. You can see all of the pinned discussions here directly from Dovetail, which are things that are priority items directly from the Dovetail team. Various questions or concerns that may be out there from various members of the community. You can start a discussion, subscribe or unsubscribe from the forums. You can view screenshots from other folks. Now these are shots that come directly from in-game. These are not edited. So these are just raw screenshots, and you can see there's some really, really beautiful ones that are out there. If you like, you can click on a screenshot, you can comment on it, you can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, etc., etc. Artwork are basically shots that come from in-game that have been edited somehow, let's say through some sort of a Windows application that allows you to edit photos. So usually these have a little bit more flair to them, a little bit more, ambiance to them because they've been edited from outside of the game, as well as sometimes you'll even find some real-world screenshots. You'll see the broadcasts, which are, like I said, the live streams that are going on. You can view videos from the community. Most of these come directly from YouTube. Look at news directly from Dovetail Games, announcements from Dovetail Games. You can read guides, as I said, from the community, and also read the reviews. So that's the outside of Steam in a nutshell, and some of the critical parts that I think everybody should know how to access. The one last thing that I'll discuss is the DLC. So if you'd like, you can click here on the DLC, and you can see all the different DLC or downloadable content that's available for Microsoft Flight Simulator X Steam Edition. These are directly from Dovetail, and they're great because they're kind of one-click installs. But remember that there are third-party developed add-ons that are available outside of Steam if you would like to venture off into the World Wide Web. But if you just want to have things that are nice and simple and convenient, you can always just add it directly to your cart, click purchase, and it'll automatically install into your FSX Steam Edition folder for you, as well as you'll receive any updates to these add-ons directly from Dovetail Games and from the developers. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump onto the game. So we click the play button. You can actually see that I have the game already launched. So when you first launch the game, you'll automatically come here to the landing page, or the home page. Now here on the home page, you'll see the latest news from Dovetail Games. You'll be able to access the Steam store if you'd like to look at downloadable content, as well as you get links to FSXinsider.com, which is actually a very old website that was abandoned by Microsoft after they abandoned the Microsoft Flight Simulator franchise. However, Dovetail Games has relaunched that. If you were to click on that, it'll open up a Windows Explorer, and you could see information from Dovetail Games, discussions, articles, reviews, etc., etc., and all kinds of great information for you to view from out there directly from Dovetail Games. One thing I will point out here on this page is that there is this mute and unmute button. This means that you can either mute or unmute the game the game's or the interface's music that exists in the background. Free flight is where you'll be spending about 90% of your time once you get the hang of things. This is where you're able to set up, plan, and design your flights the way that you'd like. Everything from casual flights to replicating routes that are done by airlines. You can do a number of things here, and I'll quickly browse through them for you. First of all, you can change the time and season. Now, the time and season is localized to wherever your current time zone is. So, as of the time when I launched the game, it was 11:57. Which was about 18 minutes ago or so here. And since I'm on the West Coast, and Friday Harbor is an airport on the West Coast, it shows my local time. But if I was on the East Coast, it would be 3 hours behind me, etc., etc. You're able to choose your airport that you'd like to go to, so you can do that a couple of ways, either by typing in the airport name. So let's say I wanted to fly at a Los Angeles International Airport, I could type in Los Angeles. It'll allow me to go there. Let's say I wanted to fly to KSPA, which is Santa Barbara Airport. I could type in the airport identifier or the ICAO code, which you can find out on the internet, or you'll start to learn and memorize them as you continue to do flying. You can even look by city. So let's say, for example, I wanted to find an airport that is out of Seattle. I can type in Seattle, and you can see here, these are all the different airports that exist in Seattle. I can also search by country, by city, similar to what we did up here, by state or province. So if I wanted to find airports out of Texas, but let's say I'm not too familiar with all the cities in Texas, and I can also choose the runway or starting point. So for example, if I were to click on Seattle Boeing Field, I can go down here to the choose runway starting position, and I can choose either to start out on one of the runways, helipad, or I can choose to start out at a gate based on the size of my aircraft, whether it be large, small, at a gate, at a military ramp, at a cargo ramp, etc., etc. Next up, we'll talk about the weather. So real quickly, the weather themes are very simple. Number one, you'll have predefined weather themes that come by default with FSX Theme Edition, and sometimes when you add on add-ons, such as some Orbix sceneries, they also give you Orbix weather, but you guys can see that you do have some default weather settings here. For the most part, the default weather settings will allow you to just about fly in any condition you can think of, whether it be from heavy snows to major thunderstorms to cold fronts that look relatively beautiful but can offer some very challenging flying, or even just clear skies if you just want to take it easy, winter wonderlands, fly in the middle of storms, etc., etc. You can also choose to select real-world weather, which is static, which means it'll download an immediate snapshot of the localized weather wherever you are in the world, or whatever airport you selected, and it'll provide a static shot of that weather. That weather will not change, will not be updated throughout the day, so if you were to fly there for 1 minute or 1 hour, the weather would remain static. You can also choose to have real-world updated weather, which gets updated about every 15 minutes. However, if you guys watch my freeware video, which I'll be sure to link below, you guys can find that there are actually some better real-world weather add-ons, both freeware and payware, that you can use in lieu of this. And then last but not least, you can select user-defined weather, which allows you to basically define, based on where you are, all the different weather conditions. And you can even go into advanced weather and select the different weather conditions at various altitudes, the temperature, the pressure, the wind, the visibility, etc., etc. So you can go in there and play with that, but it allows you an extra layer of customization. As I've already pointed out, you can change the time and season, so you can change it to be winter in the middle of the day or summer in the middle of the night. And then also we'll look at the aircraft. So when you click on aircraft, you can change the different aircraft that you would like to fly in whatever scenario. So if I didn't want to fly an ultralight here at Friday Harbor in the middle of the night in fair weather, I could select just about any aircraft that exists in my inventory that I got directly from the Dovetail DLC page, or that I got from a third-party add-on developer. One thing that I did want to point out when you look at the current aircraft is that based on how many add-ons you have, it could take a little bit of time to load, as you see here, but eventually it will come up, so just be patient, especially if you've added on a number of heavy aircraft add-ons. So now you can see that my add-ons have loaded. One thing you may notice is that it may look as though the selection is relatively limited. To allow you to see all the aircraft that you have installed in all their different variants, you want to select this little check check box down here that says show all variations. When you select that, you guys can now see that I went from having one Augusta Westland EH-101 to having a number of different liveries for them. The same goes for all the rest of my aircraft. Now, if you wanted to sort these aircraft, you can select the aircraft manufacturer. You can select the publisher, which is the add-on publisher, PMDG, Alabeo, Lionheart, etc., etc. You can also select the aircraft type, whether I want to fly a twin-engine turboprop, a glider, a rotorcraft or a helicopter, or some of my specific commercial jets. Once you've selected the aircraft, so let's say we want to fly a 737-800 in the United livery, I can click on details down here to change some of the elements of this aircraft. So I can change my tail number, which shows up obviously on the tail of the aircraft. I can change the airline call sign that ATC will address me as. I can change the flight number if I want to replicate a real-world flight. I can change my aircraft to be a heavy or not, and I can even show my tail number. I can also see some information about the aircraft here on the left-hand side. If I wanted to kind of browse my aircraft, I can simply left-click and drag, or I can also scroll in and scroll out on the aircraft to get a little bit of a better view of the aircraft's details and kind of browse around my livery or, look at an aircraft before I'm ready to actually fly it. So that's it. Once you've selected those things, you can go into flying, but you can also set up some additional elements. If I wanted to select fuel and payload on my ultralight, I can go ahead and select fuel and payload, and I can do a number of different things. Number one, I can display my fuel quantity as weight instead of the gallons measurement. I can change the amount of fuel that goes in my tank, and different aircraft will have different tanks. You may have a left, right, center, aft, etc., etc., but in my little ultralight I just have one tank. I can change the percentage or the actual amount of gallons or pounds of fuel that's on board. I can change the payload, so if I had multiple seats, such as for pilots or for passengers or for cargo, etc., I could do that here on this page. And then also, I could save my flight. If, let's say, this is a flight that I'd like to continue to do multiple times and I want to make it nice and convenient, I can select save, name it something, and then when I click on this load button at a later time, I can select the various flights that I would like to replay from whatever the current state is of that flight. I can also go here and go into my flight planner. Now, I will be doing a more in-depth tutorial at a later time that'll show various ways to do flight planning, but just as a quick and dirty, you can choose your departure location. So let's say I was departing from Los Angeles International Airport and I wanted to fly over to Ontario International Airport in Southern California. I could select whether I'd like to fly VFR or IFR based on the visibility in the game or the complexity of how I'd like to fly it. I can choose to fly directly via GPS, which just creates a straight line for me, using low altitude airways, high altitude airways, which obviously you wouldn't want to do in an ultralight. I can also choose for it to fly me VOR to VOR. Just for the sake of this tutorial, we'll look at VOR to VOR, and I can click on Find Route. When I do that, you guys can see that it takes me from LAX to the Palm VOR to KONT. I can remove or introduce elements from this map, which may look a little bit complex right now. You can see there's some airspace, there are VORs that are out there on the map and other airports, etc. So if I wanted to remove, let's say for example, airports and some of the airspace, etc., etc., I could do that by selecting or deselecting these elements. For a description of what these elements are, when you hover your mouse over them, just look down here in this little information box, and it'll tell you that, hey, these are NDBs, these are ILS feathers, etc., etc. I then from there can either save this if this is something I'd like to fly at. I can also change the altitude, by the way, but I can save it. I can load an existing flight plan that I've already created. I can clear it all together, and I can also look at the nav log, which will tell me this is when you can expect to arrive at this VOR based on your aircraft, this is how much fuel you'll be using along the way, etc., etc. Alright, and once you're done there, the last thing you can do is you can set up failures. Now, the failures is actually a pretty cool little feature. It does not work with all add-ons, but with the stock add-ons that come with FSX Steam Edition, or I should say the stock aircraft, you can set up a number of different things. So number one, you can set up single component failures based on your aircraft. Obviously, the ultralight is not a very complex aircraft, so it doesn't have a whole lot of components to fail in the first place. But I could set up to arm or fail in a certain amount of minutes to terminate a number of minutes for each one of my components within my aircraft. I can also set up a random component failure. So let's say I want 2 of my components to fail 5 minutes into the flight, and I don't want those 2 to fail beyond the time limit of 10 minutes. So in other words, 5 minutes after my flight, I can expect something to fail, but I shouldn't expect anything else to fail after 10 minutes into the flight. I can also just hit reset failures and it'll reset them for me. I can have some specific things go out on me, such as some of my systems, my radios, my engines, and my controls, etc. Then I could hit fly now to just go ahead and fly. Over here you'll see the missions tab, and the missions tab is a lot of fun. The missions tab basically provides predefined missions that come from either add-ons or from the stock simulation itself, which, by the way, the stock simulation itself of Microsoft Flight Simulator Extreme Edition, which includes not only Gold but also the Acceleration Pack, has a ton of different missions you can fly. I have definitely not come close to flying all of them. These missions are cool because they give you little rewards when you complete them that you can put in your pilot log, which I'll show you guys at a little bit of a later time. And you can even, if you just want to fly these things in some of your add-on aircraft, you can even choose to enable changes to the mission, which allow you to change things such as the weather, the aircraft that you're flying, etc. When you do those things, you no longer get the rewards. To filter these, you can select, for example, Jane Whittaker's Dangerous Approaches, and I can fly her missions here. I can fly things that are just for fun. I can fly things that take me to be a military fighter pilot in an F-18 or in the EH-101, or I can do a number of different kind of military-based flights, law enforcement, things that come in the acceleration pack, such as doing rhino rescues, all kinds of really cool stuff. One thing I would definitely say for new pilots, in addition to Learning Center, is go through these tutorials. These tutorials will show you pretty much everything you need to know about getting started in Microsoft Flight Simulator Extreme Edition, and they provide you with some really great briefings and some really great voiceover and guidance from a virtual co-pilot or a virtual instructor. You can go to the briefing, and when you go to the briefing, it'll show you, based on the type of mission that you selected, everything from charts for your applicable route to weather information. It'll let you know what to expect during the flight, etc. Give you guys some tips, some maps, and some charts, as I said, etc. Obviously, this is a very simple one, so it doesn't give you much, but you'll be able to see all that information when you go to the briefing and then when you actually go into the flight. So definitely spend some time here, and like I said, if you're a new pilot, start with your first takeoff. You can end with learning how to land on aircraft carriers and how to do Red Bull air racing, etc. It's a lot of fun. It'll teach you a lot of great things about how to get your aviation career started. Here's a multiplayer tab. We'll be doing some more multiplayer tutorials a little bit later on, but just basically the gist of it is when you click on the multiplayer tab, it'll take you to the multiplayer interface. When you go to the multiplayer interface, you'll select your Steam user ID. You can go here to select your network settings if you would like to set up some specific ports, etc. And you can even create a LAN if you and your friends, for example, have some laptops daisy-chained, or you're at a flight sim convention or something like that where you can connect to a local LAN. You would just hit sign in, and it would sign you into the multiplayer session, where you can then browse multiplayer games. You can see your friends that are online. You can join their aircraft, etc. However, like I said, we'll be doing a little bit more of an in-depth multiplayer tutorial at a later time. So you guys remember when I was talking about the missions and how they give you, wow, actually I didn't even know I had all these rewards. So as I told you guys that when you do those missions, you'll get some rewards. So this is where you'd find the rewards based on the missions that you've completed. So you can see it'll log your amount of landings with the game, how many hours you've flown, etc., etc. I've reinstalled the game a bunch of different times, so it's pretty surprising that I have over 1,000 total hours, but in all these different aircraft. But you'll be able to see all the little achievements that you've earned. And if you wanted to see more information about it, you can click on View Details, and it'll tell you what exactly that reward is for if it isn't obvious. You can also select, postcards based on some missions, your special items, your badges, your certificates, your trophies, your medals, your, etc., etc. So you can also view your logbook here, and this will show you all the different flights that you've flown. Once again, as I said, I've reinstalled this thing a bunch of times, so I have way more flights than this, but it'll show you all the different flights that you've done since the last time you've reinstalled the game. And then also you can go here to photos, and photos will essentially pull up the screenshots that you've taken in the game, which you can actually also access just by going over here to your Steam overlay. You can view screenshots, select the game that you'd like to look at, and then you can see all your screenshots right here in this folder. It'll load all of them up there for you, and then you can upload them to the cloud and upload them to the community as well. Alright, now let's go into the Learning Center. So the Learning Center, when I started flying with Microsoft Flight Simulator, over a decade and a half ago, I started out here, and this is where I learned a lot of stuff. So first of all, it'll walk you through some key topics, all about missions, the living world. It'll tell you some things about the options, and a lot of things will actually be redundant to the video that you're watching now, but feel free to just spend, 10 minutes or so in here just getting a feel for some of the stuff that Dovetail Games and Microsoft want you to know about the simulator. You can use the flight map, which is essentially a easy to navigate way of saying, hey, if I wanted to know a little bit more about using the map in FSX, I can click down here, click on using the map, and it'll take me over to the Learning Center item that talks about using the map. I can go to my index, which an index is what it sounds like. So once again, if I want to learn more about the map, I can click on M. I see map, and using the map, aviation charts, etc. And last but not least, you can access the lessons page. What's the lessons page ties very closely into some of those tutorial missions that we talked about on the mission side. So, I can click on here, and it'll tell me some of the aeronautic principles of straight and level flight, the way that G-forces and the way that flight controls control the aircraft. Some of the basics of physics and the way that physics has a dynamic impact on your aircraft. So it's ground school level stuff that's built right in for free when you have a version of FSX Steam Edition, and it'll really help you become a more capable pilot. And hey, even if you know a lot about flight simulation, you'd be surprised with how many things you can relearn or have an old dog learn new tricks just by going through these tutorials and these lessons. And as I said, they do tie into some of the missions that walk you through the actual game tutorials of how to, or the simulator tutorials of how to fly. So that's the Learning Center in a nutshell. I'll come back to settings, and I'll just show you guys real quick with the store. The store takes you back to the DLC page that we looked at earlier when we were actually in the Steam interface. So let's go ahead and jump into settings, because this is what I get a lot of questions on. So before we go into the display settings, let's look at some of these over here. You have your sound settings, which allow you to adjust the sound levels or the volume levels of your engines, cockpit elements, such as buttons being clicked, the environment, such as other aircraft, wind, etc., as well as voice and the voice controls. The voices that you may hear in your tutorials are also your air traffic controllers while you're in the game. I like my voice way up, and I can turn up the volume on my computer, on my headset, to adjust these other levels because I don't like my ATC voice being drowned out. You can select the audio outputs. So let's say, for example, you're using a microphone and you want your audio to be put out to your desktop headset or something like that, or to your desktop speakers. You can select that here, as well as, of course, your voice input if you have multiple microphones, etc. Whether or not you'd like to play the user interface sounds or the user interface music, that's the same thing that basically this mute button up here does for you. And then if you do have the music enabled, you can change the music that is being played by simply selecting the music down there. Next up, you'll see controls. So controls essentially allows you to calibrate joysticks and use various controllers out there, such as joysticks or even a Xbox 360 or Xbox One controller to control your game. So you see two options here, which are simple and advanced controls. If I do have my controller enabled, right now it's looking at the settings for my SciTech rudder pedals, but you can select this to change to your yoke, your Xbox 360 controller. If I had my actual yoke plugged in, you would see my actual SciTech yoke in here as well. I can select either simple, which basically says that all your axes will be tied together in terms of their sensitivity and their null zones, or I can adjust them a little bit differently or independently by clicking here on advanced controls. So my left and right brakes, how sensitive I want them to be, and then what kind of null zone I want. So if I barely tap my brake, do I really want it to respond? Probably not. So I would select my null zone in this area or further to the right to basically increase the amount of leniency that you get when you input a control. So if I had it all the way over to the right, I would have to deflect a yoke, or I would have to deflect my brakes, or push down my brakes a pretty significant amount before it would even respond in the first place. And then how much response I get based on my input would be determined by the sensitivity. So those are two different things. Null zone kind of creates a buffer zone between your inputs and when the input is actually registered by the device, and the sensitivity is just how much deflection you get or how much reaction you get out of the device when you give it an input. You guys can see my rudder down here, etc. And I would see the aileron or the elevator controls here as well if I selected my yoke. This is if you're flying with a keyboard. You can select the keyboard sensitivities, and of course you can reset the defaults right here as well. Buttons and keys essentially allows you to map the buttons and keys to your liking. So for example, if you're using a joystick, you may want your landing gear to be one of the buttons on the joystick, or if I wanted to have a button that would reset my view directly forward, I could set all those things here in the buttons and keys. It's really just like any other game. You can map your button and keys to your liking based on your input device. So for example, if I did want to change my views, I can go down here to my views, and I could select to have my view reset to the forward view by pushing a button. I can look right, left, etc., etc. This is also a great way just of learning the inputs that pertain to Microsoft Flight Simulator Extreme Edition. There are a ton of inputs, a ton of button commands that you can use to supplement the clickable buttons or the clickable commands that you have actually in the virtual cockpit of your aircraft. And you can see all the different types of categories here, everything from all of your events to simulator events, which essentially controls the way that the simulator reacts, such as speeding, uptime, or slewing around, etc., etc. Your control surfaces with the control surfaces of your actual aircraft, such as your rudder, your aileron, etc., etc. The way that your engines react to different inputs. So, whether you want to engage reverse thrust, or you want to cut your engines or start your engines, etc., etc. The systems in your aircraft, your avionics systems, your electrical systems, etc. Your lights, your radios, inputs for your autopilot, inputs for your instruments. For example, if you wanted to change the heading bug on your heading indicator, if you wanted to reset your barometric pressure on your altimeter, your views, failures, if you want to induce failures automatically in the game, some of your multiplayer commands, and also some commands for your GPS. Last but not least, you'll see these control axes, and these tie very much so into the stuff that you saw here in the calibration page. So basically, what do I want my rudder pedals to do? So when I click on the right toe of my rudder pedals, I would have my right axis of my brake engage, whether or not I'd like to reverse those commands. And basically what reversing is let's say, for example, you wanted the brake to engage when you let go of the brake pedal instead of when you push it down. You could simply unselect this box and it would do exactly that. It's no different than having a reverse control on a Xbox game or something like that. It basically just reverses the input, or what would seem to be the intuitive input of whatever the command is. You can see all the different things that I can do here with my rudder pedals, and then of course I have my mouse look, and then if I had my joystick or my yoke plugged in, I would see commands for that as well. To change a command, you simply double click on it. It'll allow you to do whatever you want to do. If you don't want to change anything, just hit cancel. And if you want to clear the command altogether, you can just hit clear. And you can also ask it to do the action when the key is released. So for example, if I wanted to engage a parking brake, but I didn't want to engage the parking brake when I hit a specific button, I could tell it to engage the parking brake once I actually release that button. Let's say if it's a button that's being used for something else in the game. I can delete joystick assignments, change my assignments, reset to defaults, etc., etc. Realism basically allows you to select the realism of not only the flight models, but also some of the challenges of flying a real-world aircraft. So you have a number of different options here: easy, medium, hard, and custom. Custom allows you to pick and choose which elements of reality you would like to introduce. So I have my flight model turned all the way up to realistic. However, because of some weird AI aircraft that can exist in the game sometimes, I ignore my crashes and damage because I definitely don't fly to try to crash my aircraft. Pilot controls aircraft lights, so you can have the aircraft lights controlled automatically. Whether or not you'd like to enable gyro drift, display true or indicated airspeed, which basically in real life you use indicated airspeed. True airspeed is automatically adjusted for temperature, elevation, etc., etc. You can allow collisions with aircraft, or also habits that aircraft stress causes damage. So for example, if you pull too hard on the yoke while going too fast, your aircraft will break apart, etc. Enable auto mixture, which basically means that for certain aircraft, the higher you go, the more lean you need to run the fuel, as there's less air, or oxygen I should say, to run the engine. So in real world you would have to lean that aircraft out to make sure that you're not flooding it with more fuel than it's getting oxygen. But if that's too complex for you, you can enable auto mixture and it'll automatically do that for you. You can set up unlimited fuel if you don't want to worry about fuel planning or running out of fuel. You can set it so that if you overstress an aircraft, the engine can become damaged and fail on you. You can enable GFX and also auto rudder, which basically means that as you're making turns to the left or right, instead of having to use a rudder to basically do a coordinated turn, so that you don't end up in a spin or something like that, you can get the game to automatically do auto rudder for you. So this is great because it allows new pilots to, in an unintimidating way, get just a feel for what it's like to fly, and then as they become more proficient at controlling the aircraft, they can select or deselect some of these options to make it more and more true to real life. Last but not least is you'll see flying tips up here. Basically, flying tips are just little pop-ups that'll come out and say, hey, your parking brake is not set, or your engines are not started, or this or that, and if you don't want those little pop-ups happening, you can either select or deselect that. General takes you into your general settings, so whether or not you'd like to see the opening screen, whether or not you'd like to pause on task switch. So for example, if you were to alt tab out of the game, if you still want your plane to continue to fly in the background, let's say while you're opening up another program or writing something down in Notepad or whatever you may be doing, you can choose whether or not you'd like the game to pause when you lose focus on it. If you'd like for it to prompt you when you're ready to exit the game. If you'd like to use system time for free flights, you guys remember when we opened a free flight, it automatically localized the time. If you don't want to do that, you can deselect that. For your missions, you can show captioning, compass, and pointer, whether or not you'd like for those to show up. Show your message log, so the previous messages that came through from ATC, whether or not you'd like for them to be there for you. Auto open the ATC window when you get an ATC message from air traffic control. Use a pilot voice or not, so if you want to kind of do voiceovers yourself, you can do that, or you can also select a number of different male and female voices to act on your behalf. Units of measurement, if you're in Europe, you can use metric, and you can use the US system for feet and inches, etc., based on your localization. And then latitude and longitude, how you'd like for that to be coordinated based on your preference. Last but not least, before we get into display settings, is the scenery library. Basically, the scenery library allows you to access all of the add-ons that you have in your scenery library. So for example, if I wanted to fly at the default Greenland Nuuk Airport, what I could do is just simply deselect this, and it'll automatically load back the original default Greenland Nuuk Airport. This may be useful if you think that an add-on may be causing you a performance issue, or you have some sort of anomaly that's popping up and you want to see whether or not it's that add-on. Also, it's a common practice for a lot of simmers out there, if you're flying very, very long hauls and you're going to be flying over a bunch of add-on airports that you've installed, that you disable all the add-on airports that you want to actually be using, so that the game isn't having to constantly load and unload all these other complex add-on airports that you're not even going to be using anyways. So this allows you to adjust the add-ons that are currently active in your game at any given time. You can move up or down the priority of these particular sceneries. So for example, if I wanted to make sure that the latest airport that I just installed is the first priority as it pertains to it being displayed in the game, so that I don't get a default airport or some other add-on airport leaking through, I can move it up in its priority. The higher a priority, obviously the higher the priority it is for it to be displayed in the game. You can also move it down. You can edit an area, add an area if you'd like to manually add a add-on airport. You could delete an area, etc., etc. Down here you see this bottom that basically allows you to empty the scenery cache on exit. So whatever the cache that was already loaded into the game for any default or any add-on airports that you may have or sceneries you may have had, you can flush that cache on exit by simply selecting that. Alright, now let's go ahead and get into the element that I probably get the most questions about, which is, hey, settings, how do I manage these, what are they about, etc., etc. So I'm going to walk you guys through this, tell you guys what each one of these mean, how you use each one of these, and I'll even show you guys some before and after screenshots so you can see just how much visual impact each one of these settings have, and you can make the right decision that is there for you. If you do have a scenery or display setting that you'd like to keep, you can click on save. You can load it at a later time. You can also reset to default, or you can go here into customize. So basically we'll start out here, which is graphics. Here this shows you which graphics card you'd like to use. The global texture resolution, which basically this adjusts the resolution of your sceneries in your aircraft. When you max it all the way out, it's 4096 by 4096. When you turn it down one notch, it goes to 2048. 1024, etc., etc., as you take it further and further down. By default, it's at 4096 by 4096. However, if you use less complex add-ons, or let's say you're just using stock airports, you could very well operate it at 1024 by 1024 if you'd like. It's really up to you, it's your preference, but basically it just creates sharper textures within the game, especially if you're using add-on airports or add-on aircraft. You can change your resolution to whatever resolution you'd like. This should, for the most part, for most users, match the resolution of your computer monitor, which for a lot of folks is going to be 1920 by 1080, or for me, since I'm using a Quad HD display, mine is 2560 by 1440. You'll see your filtering here, which is anisotropic, and then also whether or not you'd like to use anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing does have a minor performance hit, but most modern computers with modern graphics cards can, and by modern I mean a graphics card that's come out in the last 3 to 4 years, should be able to handle anti-aliasing just fine. You can choose to use the DirectX 10 mode or not. For a lot of users, you'll be completely fine with DirectX 9. DirectX 10 does create some anomalies which have to be fixed with an add-on known as the Steve FSX fixer. It is rather pricey, so you may want to avoid that if you're not willing to make that investment. But DirectX 9 looks perfectly fine, it runs perfectly fine, and for 95% of users out there, they should be fine with DirectX 9. However, I use DirectX 10. Lens flare, which basically creates a kind of bokeh effect, if you will, based on the position of the sun relative to your aircraft. It's just a kind of nice added graphical feature. Light bloom basically makes an aircraft look shiny or reflective based on the amount of ambient light that exists out there, especially from the sun. I do not use this because this has a very, very difficult performance impact, and a lot of times it actually washes out the aircraft and makes it look somewhat unrealistic. So for most users, I would recommend not using light bloom, but you can play with it and see whether or not it's something that you enjoy using. But do be warned, it does have a pretty significant performance impact no matter how modern your hardware is. You can choose advanced animations. So advanced animations allow for you to see things such as the wing flex of an aircraft, see animals at certain airports, especially if you're doing some of those missions where there's little animated people and animated vehicles and animated animals and stuff like that. You can turn that on or off by using advanced animations. It has a very, very small performance impact, so you should probably just leave that on. And then informational text, whether you'd like for it to be just one single line, such as when you're listening to the ATIS or the Automated Terminal Information System, whether you'd like for it to scroll across your screen from right to left, or whether you'd like for it to just display in a single line. On the aircraft page, you will see that you have the option to use a 3D or a 2D instrument panel. 3D virtual cockpit basically gives you a sense of 3D immersion or space within the aircraft cockpit, so I would recommend that most users use this. Whether or not you'd like to show the cockpit tooltips, basically this means when you put your mouse over some of the elements of some aircraft, it'll tell you what the element is for. So it may tell you, hey, this is the landing gear switch, this is the autopilot switch, etc., etc. Whether or not you'd like to use high-resolution 3D virtual cockpit. And so for a look at what that looks like. So as you can see that when it's on high resolution, you can see all the gauges very clearly, and when you turn it off, you can see that things can become a little bit more blurry inside of the cockpit, so that's the difference. The 2D panel transparency, which basically means that if you're using the 2D panel and not using the virtual cockpit, whether or not you'd like for that 2D panel to be see-through or not, so that you can still kind of see some of the elements beyond your cockpit. Whether or not you like the aircraft to cast shadows on the ground or cast shadows on itself. I do not use these, as it has some problems with some of the AI add-ons that I use, but they do have a nominal performance impact. You'll usually lose at least 2 to 3 frames or so by casting these shadows, because essentially what it's doing is it's drawing the model of the aircraft twice, obviously not in its full detail, but it does have a performance impact. So it's up to you to use it or not. It's really 100% your preference. Whether or not you'd like for aircraft landing lights to illuminate the ground. This just basically means, well, it is what it sounds like as you're approaching an airport or taxiing around or something like that. If you want your strobes to illuminate the ground or your landing lights, etc., you can select or deselect that. On the scenery, so we'll be talking about a couple of things here. First of all, your level of detail radius. So basically what your level of detail radius is how far away from your aircraft the terrain is drawn in a high resolution. And so for a look at what that looks like. So if you look just at the tip of wing, you'll see that things are very clear and defined, and then as we actually turn it down, you can see that the ground becomes a little bit more blurry off in the distance. Complexity and mesh complexity is basically how complex the terrain is drawn in terms of the variety and diversity of things such as slopes, rock formations, cliffs, hilltops, plateaus, etc., etc. So the further you turn that down, the more bland and more flat the terrain will look. And so for a look at what that looks like. So if you look out in the distance, you can see that the mountains are a little bit more defined and look very clear and distinct. And then when you turn it down, you can see that things become a little bit more flat and bland on the mountainside. Mesh resolution pretty much ties directly into mesh complexity. They do pretty much the same thing. It's just how good the resolution of your mesh is. So, right now you see 5 meters. You can turn it all the way up to 1 meter, or turn it all the way down to 305 meters. To be honest with you, nobody really is going to fly at 305 meters. Some folks do like to use 10. I use 5 personally because it doesn't make the mesh too sharp in some areas and not sharp in others. It's kind of a nice balance, but it's really up to you how you'd like to set this. Basically, this just determines how sharp the resolution of the mesh based on its complexity is. Texture resolution, this basically determines how detailed the ground is. So if we know the level of detail radius determines how far out quality ground textures are rendered, the texture resolution determines how high of quality those ground textures will be. So you have the choice of 7 centimeters all the way down to 10 meters, which means you're going to get a very, very blurry ground. And so for a look at what that looks like. So if you look at the ground below us, you can see that things look very sharp and distinct, and then as you actually turn it down, you can see that things become far more blurry and clearly the resolution has been degraded. Water effects. Water effects essentially tells you how complex your water is going to be. So the higher it goes, the more elements that will be introduced into your water, such as waves, reflections of your aircraft, reflection of terrain around your aircraft, reflection of other simulator elements such as buildings and autogen, reflection of the sky, reflection of clouds, etc., etc. So for a lot of folks, flying somewhere in the mid 2x to max range are going to be very, very good. Max basically means that everything is reflected in the water, and of course you have wave animations. I, however, find that it does have somewhat of a performance hit, and with DirectX 10 it doesn't really play all that nice, so I use a mid 2x, which reflects the things I want to see, which are the sky, the clouds, etc. It gives you a very, very convincing and beautiful looking water without really any sort of performance hit. And so, for an example of what that looks like. So as you can see, to begin with, the water looks very convincing. You can see the reflections from the sky as well as the clouds, and then when you actually turn it down, you can see that things become far more flat and the water looks less dynamic. Land detail textures. So land detail textures basically means whether or not the texture of the ground or of the land is detailed. So this would mean whether or not there's a generic rock formation, or whether or not there's diversity in the rock formation that sits on a cliff or something like that, whether or not you have certain markings at an airport, etc., etc. So it's really kind of like the texture resolution, but more so whether or not there are overlays of some sort of detailed textures on the ground. Next up, you'll have scenery complexity, and so the scenery complexity basically adjusts how many different sorts of buildings and or autogen elements you'll find in a scenery. So for example, are you going to see just one kind of building, or are you going to see a number of different buildings, which of course does have a performance impact. This definitely has a performance impact, but it adds to the immersion if you have a very diverse and lush looking world. So a lot of folks like to keep the scenery complexity either at very dense or extremely dense, but it's up to you to really play with that. And so just for a look at what that looks like. So as we begin, you can see that we have all of the different buildings, and this is on the highest setting. Then when you turn it down to normal, you can see that some of the buildings at the airport actually start to disappear. It looks less dynamic. And then finally, when we turn it all the way down, you can see that pretty much all the airport buildings disappear. And then also we have autogen density, which basically, if this is the diversity of the different autogen that you have, this is how much of it you'll see. So this adjusts how many trees, how many buildings, how many neighborhoods, etc. You'll see in your world. Some folks use extremely dense. I find that very dense is a nice kind of performance versus appearance. So I use very dense, but you can feel free to use whatever setting you'd like. Remember, I have a ton of add-ons, so with those add-ons, very dense kind of creates a nice balance for me. But if you're not using a lot of add-ons, I'd say crank it all the way up, because your performance is going to be great anyways, because it's really FSX Steam Edition under its own power is on modern hardware runs actually pretty doggone good. It's not until you start adding in a ton of add-ons that you really kind of start to have some performance hits. Ground scenery shadows is basically what it sounds like, whether or not buildings have shadows, etc. on the ground. To be honest with you, it's a very inconsistent thing in FSX Steam Edition, because this is a 9-year-old program now. So I would recommend for most folks leaving this off, but if you would like to have that little added level of immersion, especially if you're flying very low to the ground, you can feel free to turn that on or off. I personally keep it off, and it definitely does have a performance impact. And the special effects detail basically adjusts how much smoke you see, or if you're flying over a forest fire, whether or not you see the fire animation, whether or not you see certain wave animations, etc., etc. So this basically allows you to adjust the special effects detail that exists within the game. So 2 tabs left. Number 1, weather. Weather basically allows you to control the way that your sky and your weather looks. So the cloud draw distance basically allows you to adjust how far out clouds are drawn on the horizon. I use 90 miles because at 90 miles is when you kind of start to get beyond what the average human's real world visual range would be. Based on that, I tend to use 90 miles. However, you can crank this all the way up to 110 miles. This definitely does have a performance impact, so I would say to make sure you play with that and figure out what's best for your system, because obviously the more clouds, the more aliasing needs to be done on those clouds, the more draw calls there are for those clouds, and that can have a performance impact. Thermal visualization basically allows you to, especially if you're flying gliders, either see no thermal visualization, see one that's considered to be natural, which normally would mean that you see birds kind of flying on a thermal or gliding on a thermal, like you'll see on the edge of a mountainside or on a steep hill or something like that, or whether you'd like to have one that's called a schematic one, which basically is a kind of green vortex looking animation that you'll see in some of those areas where there are thermals. Definitely far easier for you to see those and identify those instead of having to search around for birds. And if you're a glider pilot, it's really up to you how you'd like those thermals to look. For myself, since I don't really fly gliders, I just like the natural one because, you know, it makes the world look a little bit more alive when occasionally you see a few birds flying around next to an airport or something like that. This is whether or not you'd like to download winds aloft data, which are winds as you're higher up in the altitudes and as you're in flight, whether or not you'd like for those winds to be updated or downloaded while you're flying, whether or not you'd like to disable or enable turbulence on your aircraft. Obviously I want it enabled, so I leave this unchecked. And then the rate at which weather changes over time. Since I use a third-party weather engine, I turn this off. However, if you're going to be using the stock FSX weather engine, you can tell it how often or how infrequently you'd like for it to update the weather. You have the cloud detail here, which are simple clouds versus detailed clouds. Basically what this allows you to do is to have either clouds that are very detailed, such as having multiple layers of clouds, such as cumulus clouds, cirrus clouds, etc. So this really just allows you to select whether or not you'd like a very flat looking sky that has, you know, just kind of one layer of clouds, or whether you'd like to have multiple layers of clouds. And so just an idea of what that looks like. So you can see that to begin with, you can see clearly that there are multiple layers of clouds, and then as we actually turn it down or turn it off, you can see that those layers disappear and the sky looks far more flat. And now we'll go over the traffic tab. And so the traffic tab, it basically allows you to adjust the elements of AI that exists in or around your world. So airline traffic are obviously larger aircraft. This is where you get passenger aircraft, military aircraft, etc. How little or how many of those you'd like for those to display. I would recommend leaving it somewhere between 50 and let's say 80. Beyond that, you start to have almost too many aircraft running around, especially if you're using an add-on AI program. So it's really up to you. You can play with that as you'd like. That does have a performance impact, as you could probably naturally figure out, because of course you have more AI being rendered, drawn, more logic being put into those AI, etc. General aviation is the same thing, but these are just smaller GA aircraft. This is where you see your Cessnas and your Cirrus and your Beechcraft, etc. So this would be kind of casual flyers and whether or not they exist in your world. The setting you'd like to set that to is really based on what kind of flying you want to do, whether you want to see a bunch of other general aviation aircraft or whether you want to see more airliners. You can play with these two settings to find the right balance for you. Airport vehicle density basically tells you how many tugs you'll see in an airport, how many little baggage loaders you'll see in an airport, emergency vehicles, etc., running around airports. It's really up to you how few or how many of these you'd like to see. I set mine to maximum because, especially when I'm flying out of mega airports in real life, you always see a fuel truck, you always see some emergency vehicle running around, so that tends to give me the most immersion, but it's really up to you. You can change the road vehicles, which are the vehicles that you'll see actually on like the streets and the freeways and the roads of communities surrounding your airports. So as you're flying low, if you're flying a little ultralight and you're flying over your local town and you want to see all the little cars and all the traffic on the freeway, etc., you can ramp that all the way up, or you can keep it down. For myself, since I'm usually not flying too slow because low and slow because I fly kind of big jets, I leave mine at 0, but you can crank that all the way up if you'd like. That definitely does have a performance impact. So play with it to not only find the right level of visual fidelity for yourself, but also the right level of performance. And then ships and ferries are the same thing. So that's almost like the airline traffic density. These are kind of commercial boats and ferries that you'll see, and then leisure boats are like the general aviation aircraft, which are basically small yachts, small fishing boats, etc., that you'll see out there in the water. Based on the type of flying that you do, you can either turn that up or turn that down to your liking. So those are your settings in a nutshell. The way to navigate to that is just go to Computer, Local Disk, Program Files, Steam, Steam Apps, Common, and then FSX is how you would get here. This is where you find most of your elements. Now, the infamous CFG is a little bit harder to find, and so the first thing you want to do is make sure that before you do that, you have Show Hidden Files and Folders enabled in your folder options of your version of Windows. The easiest way to do that on like Windows 7 is just to type in hidden in the start menu, and you can select show hidden files and folders. Select this right here, which is show hidden files and folders, and then it'll allow you to see all the different more sensitive files and folders that exist within Windows. I would say be very careful when having this enabled, because you don't want to accidentally disable or delete some sort of a hidden file and folder that may be critical to the operation of your computer. So fair warning, just be careful when you do have this enabled. Once that's enabled, what you would do is go over to computer, local disk, users. You would select the name of your computer, in my case it's Kingdom. Go to app data, which you can see is kind of grayed out here, which means that it was hidden before, but it's now visible because I've shown my hidden files and folders. Go to roaming, then you would look for Microsoft, FSX, and here you go. So here's all your hidden kind of inner workings of FSX, and this is where you'll find the infamous CFG. First of all, before you even touch this thing, I would say don't worry about messing it up too much. If you like the way your game is running now, then you can just simply create a copy by saying, copy and paste a new version of it and renaming it FSX backup or something like that, or just keep the copy name. But if for some reason you mess it up, it's okay. You can actually just delete the fsx.cfg, and it'll reset all your settings, but it'll completely rebuild the CFG for you automatically. It's not as if, or I should say automatically once you launch the game again. So if you delete it on accident, it's really not the end of the world. It may be a little bit inconvenient to redo all your settings and stuff, but it's not like it's going to completely break your game. But if you like your settings as they currently stand, I'd recommend doing a backup of them. Just because it'll make things easier for you to restore if for some reason you mess up a setting or something like that. So when you open this up, this is where you see all of your settings. This is where you'll see all of the kind of intricacies of your game. I myself am not going to go through a tutorial on how to use this because if you actually look at my payware video, I talk about any edits that I've done to my CFG, which is really just my affinity mask setting. But Dovetail Games has really fixed 99% of the things that people used to go in here and edit, so you really don't have to change much on it. But if for some reason there's an add-on that requires you to go in here and change something in your fsx.cfg, or if there's some sort of tech support that you need that requires you to access your CFG, you can do so here. And I know that you guys will probably browse the internet and find all kinds of crazy stuff you'd like to edit or add. I'd recommend, once again, you leave it alone, because Dovetail Games has fixed most of the things that used to plague FSX in the past, and a lot of those articles, if you look at, were before December of 2014, which is when FSX Steam Edition launched. But if you need access to it, go ahead and play with it. Once again, I'd recommend backing it up first, and if for some reason something gets really screwed up, don't worry about it too much. Just delete the whole .cfg little notepad, and it'll rebuild it for you next time you launch FSX. So that is FSX Steam Edition in a nutshell. I hope that this was helpful to the new pilots that are out there, just that you can understand kind of how to use your game, how to use the interface, what this thing delivers for you, how to use the community, how to access your CFG, how to change your settings, etc., etc. And I hope that you guys stick around and continue flying with me, especially for those of you new guys, and for those of you that are experienced already. Who knows, you may have learned something new today. If not, hang around and we'll get back in the skies doing our good old classic flying. The one last thing I would say is that if for any reason there are any tutorials you guys would like to see, please drop me a comment down below, and I'd be happy to continue to do tutorials, especially for our new FSX pilots that are out there. So with that said, everybody take care, and happy flying.